Hi, how's it going? I'm Jeremy Kaufman, COO of Propagate Ventures. What our company does is we work with farms all across the country to help them transition toward agroforestry. We do this by helping them analyze, develop, and work with financing to make those systems viable. At the core of what we do, we help match the right fit tree system with the farm's context to design a system that can be growing with the farmer over the next 10, 20, and 30 years. To start off, I'm going to kind of define what agroforestry is, which really is just bringing trees into pasture, the intentional integration of permanent crops, trees and shrubs into row crop and livestock farms. And we add this little piece at the end here to serve people, place, planet, and profit as part of that. What I'm going to do now is run you through some examples of what agroforestry is, just so we can ground ourselves in the practice and how it lends itself to structural biodiversity on a farm, but also profitability. If you've ever seen cattle out on a field during a hot day, you can tell just by their natural behavior that they're looking for shade to ensure that they're not sweating so much, just like a human would. This is part of the reason why study after study has shown that cattle with shade can gain upwards of 60% more weight during those heat days than they otherwise would if there was no shade in that field. Another example of that is also in dairy, increasing milk production during those same hot days. So in areas where there's a lot of hot days, that tree shade is crucial to ensure that those cattle are still productive across that time period. And yes, there is a trade-off. You know, one of the things that we work on heavily is the amount of intercepted light within a system to ensure that we're matching fodder production needs in field with the requirements of the animals. To do this, what we look at is everything from the productivity in terms of volume, as well as the protein productivity of different grasses and legumes in field, to ensure that if we're spacing a system at 120-foot wide spacing or 60-foot wide spacing, what is the expected outcome going to be in terms of fodder production for cattle in that system? And at the peak of heat, what we want to do is optimize that shade production with that fodder production to ensure that we're meeting the demands of what that actual herd size needs for a given production system. Aside from that, there's also season extension on cool season grasses. So because you have that shade and that buffer, cool season grasses go longer into the year. As well as similarly, you have a buffer in the middle in your summer season grasses, where those start later and end a little bit earlier for when you'd expect to plant those, if the spacing is more dense in terms of the system. Tree fodder also, as an additional value add in these systems, is capable of providing high quality nutrients and protein to the animals in key times of year where those nutrients aren't available necessarily in their existing options. These are things like Kuniagi willow or mulberry for fodder that allows for those cattle to hit it a few times a year. So that way they can get those nutrients and not necessarily bring those trees to the ground. So it enables those trees to still flourish, but also add value to the cattle in fodder systems. These are all profitable agroforestry systems. And really at the core of it, it's this concept, which is the annual crops of the salary and the trees are the 401k. It's really the savings, the bank account for the system on a whole. And the reason for that is agroforestry as a process, as a system, is typically about 140% as profitable as those two systems separate. That's because you're bringing in and taking advantage of the vertical space with new crop types in your system. Now I'm going to hop to show you how we do this at the ground level so you can get a sense of what it looks like when we work with a farm. Here's a farm. It's about 124 acres in Hudson, New York in the Hudson Valley. Primarily, this farm was used for hay, corn, and soy production, and it's in transition toward an agroforestry system. The first step in doing an agroforestry design is selecting the crops and working on a crop pattern. To do this, we first look at the context of the farmer, the landowner, and we understand what the right fit crop is for their desired long-term use of that landscape. In this specific scenario, the farmer wanted to use this for hay production and wanted to get some current income from crops in a sooner time period. So to do that, we wanted to be able to produce a shrub fruit crop that was compatible with hay production, which was blackcurrant. And then they wanted some long-term higher growth crops like chestnut, and then some longer term timber for lump sum in the future. And that's the black locust timber. You can, within this process, this is all sub-centimeter accurate, viable for integration with GPS-enabled tractors. So that gives us tree counts. Because we know low lengths, we're able to kind of give you a sense of how many trees need to be purchased for the system. And then we can dig into the economics to understand what it will take to capitalize that system through to profitability and what the expected return on that system will be. These are adding value to the system on the ground above the existing land value of what you have, because you're bringing in permanent crops that produce annual cash flow or lump sum cash flow in the future. Finally, a labor snapshot gives you a sense of what it will take to manage the system across the life of that system's production. In this particular system, you're looking at a full-time farm manager and 3 part-time farm workers across the season. And then during harvest, looking at 3 to 11 person full-time harvest crews. That's specifically for when the chestnuts come to bear and for managing equipment in the early years with black currant. Now you can kind of see, going from planning to implementation, what this all takes. From top left to the bottom right, this is year 1 of development, going from the first stage of soil prep, tillage, and cover cropping for the hay crop, all the way through to planting the trees and the currants and the management of that system into the bottom right-hand corner. And you can see the trees are starting to emerge from their tree tubes in year 1, and the shrubs are looking like little babies. Finally, at the end of this, just to kind of show you and wrap it all up, here are the production crops that will come from that system outside of the hay itself, which is chestnut, blackcurrant, and black locust timber. So some of the co-benefits beyond just agroforestry being profitable is it has environmental benefits to the hydrology, to the carbon bank of the system, to the biodiversity of the system. So I'm going to run you through a few of those benefits here. The first one being that it sequesters carbon up to the amount of 2 to 8 tons of carbon per hectare per year. It's about 1 to 4 per acre per year. It decreases erosion. So cropland erodes right now at a rate of 10 tons per hectare per year. And erosion rates in forests are far, far lower, down to close to 0. And so there's a lot of value to be gained by bringing trees into these fields and being able to save trillions of dollars in lost livelihoods as a result of soil erosion. And finally, trees help retain nutrients in the soil. 53% more nitrogen than in monocultures and 17% more phosphorus than in monocultures. You can see that in poplar stream side buffers alone, you can decrease nitrogen runoff about 3 times better than just grass alone, and phosphorus about 4 to 9 times better than just grass alone. So these systems are adding value to the structural elements of your farm, not just adding a new crop to your system. So every farm that we work with has a choice with how much diversity they want in their system. There are costs and benefits to implementing biodiversity systems into your existing production system. Some of those species are not profitable species, but they do provide valuable ecological habitat. So what we'd like to look for in a system is structural biodiversity. So enough biodiversity across the whole of the system to ensure that the system is resilient, it's providing beneficial habitat to the system at large, but isn't compromising on the profitability and management of the system. So within this production system in particular, because it's fairly diverse in crop types, looking at chestnut, blackcurrant, black locust, and curly poplar, the amount of biodiversity buffer in pink comes out to about 5% of the system or so. As you can see here, those are integrated into the system rather than them being integrated in the row. That's for harvest efficiency. Part of the reason they're there as well, every kind of X amount of feet, we wanted to integrate a buffer in to ensure that there was good quality biodiversity that was running through the system. but ensuring that the benefits that come from that buffer were co-benefiting the chestnuts, the hay crop, and the black currants and the black locust, but not so much that it was the primary reason for the project. A key part of the work that we do is that we honor that every farm is different. And what that means is that the long-term plan for improving the farm, investing in the farm is going to be different for every single farm. And what that means is we need to be able to match capital sources with the wills and desires of what the farms want. Some farms don't want more debt. Some farms are comfortable with debt. Some farms only want to finance their systems with NRCS available funds and potential grants. And so a big part of the work that we do on the upfront of these analyses is understanding what is called their holistic context. And what that allows us to do is understand what is the funding gap that's going to be needed to be filled for these farms over the next 10, 20, and 30 years. And then on our ends, what we do is we look to match them with the right fit financing for their production system. One of the things that we bring to that process is long-term leasing options to separate the ownership of the trees from the land and to allow for third-party capital to invest into the trees themselves as assets. What that means is the farmers can get paid for managing those trees for somebody else on their existing land base without risking their existing land to sale.